When I came on deck the next morning, the island looked entirely different, a bit colorless and sad. The trees, which covered most of the surface, looked gray, with only streaks of yellow beach sand breaking up the dreariness. The three hills were oddly shaped spires of naked rock above the tall, dark pines and low trees. The spyglass towered about 400 feet above everything else, with sheer stone sides and a top that seemed flat enough to be a statue. Up until now, the men had worked willingly, but once we sighted the island, they lost all discipline. Island on one side and Skeleton Island on the other. The stagnant smell of sodden leaves and rotting tree trunks hung over everything.
I don't know about treasure,
the doctor said to the squire and the captain as he sniffed the air.
but I'll bet there's fever here.
Coil the ropes,
The captain ordered as the men scrambled back on deck. The men gave him hostile looks and angrily obeyed.
Resentment is spreading to the honest men, too.
The doctor observed.
The entire crew is surly.
Mutiny hangs over us like a thundercloud,
The squire whispered back. Long John, aware of the discontent, forced a smile onto his face and kept it there. He went about the ship setting a good example for the men, encouraging them to behave like real sailors. When the captain gave an order, Long John quickly got up with the cheeriest,
Aye, aye, sir.
Later, when there was nothing else to do, he sang one song after another, as if to conceal the discontent of the men.
Silver's nervousness is the worst omen of the day,
The doctor said. We met in the cabin together with Trelawney's men, Redruth, Hunter, and Joyce, who now knew about the pirates' plans. Smollett told us,
if I give the men another order, the whole ship will revolt. We've only one man to rely on now.
Who?
The squire asked.
Silver.
The captain said.
He's as anxious as we are to keep this situation from exploding, because the time isn't right. Let's allow the men an afternoon ashore, and if they all go, we'll control the ship. If none go, we'll hold the cabin. If some go, you mark my words, sir, Silver will bring them aboard again as mild as lambs.
Captain Smollett gave all the loyal men pistols, and then went on deck to address the crew.
My lads,
He said,
it's hot and we're all tired. Some time ashore will hurt nobody, and since the boats are still in the water, take them and go ashore for the afternoon. I'll fire a gun half an hour before sundown as a signal to return.
Hooray! They cheered, their bad mood vanishing.
The silly fellows must think they'll trip over treasure as soon as they land,
The squire muttered. Then Smollett quickly went below, leaving Long John to arrange who would go ashore. If the captain had remained on deck, he could no longer have pretended not to understand the situation, because it was plain that Long John was their real captain. At last, Long John decided 6 fellows would stay on board. He and the rest would leave the ship. Right then, a crazy notion, perhaps the one that saved us, came into my head. If 6 pirates were left, I knew our party could not take over the ship. But since there were only 6, the cabin party had no need of my assistance, so I decided to go ashore. Quickly, I slipped over the side, curled up under the canvas on the nearest boat, then shoved off. No one took notice of me except Alan Jenkins, who said, "Is that you, Jim? Keep your head down." Long John looked sharply over from the other boat.
Is Jim going ashore too?
From that moment, I began to regret what I had done. The shoreboats raced for the beach, but the boat I was in, having started first and being lighter and better manned, shot far ahead. Once the boat neared the trees along the shore, I caught an overhanging branch, swung myself out, and plunged into the nearest thicket. Long John and the rest were still 100 yards behind.
Jim! Jim!
I heard him shouting, but I paid no heed. Jumping and ducking, I followed my nose and ran until I could run no longer. I was happy I'd managed to get away from Long John, so I began to enjoy exploring this strange island. I crossed a marshy area full of willows, cattails, and odd swamp trees, and came out near an open piece of rolling
Some of my shipmates must be near,
I thought, and I soon heard the distant, low tones of a human voice, and then another voice. They were growing louder. Scared, I crawled under cover of the nearest bush, moments before the speakers paused, and, I supposed, sat down. The birds grew quiet and settled again to their places in the swamp. I crawled steadily but slowly on all fours toward the speakers until, at last, I raised my head. I could see between the trees all the way down into a little green clearing beside the marsh. Long John Silver stood there with the sun beating down on him, conversing with another man.
Tim Cooper,
He said,
it's because I like you that I'm warning you. Join us.
Tim's face was red, and he spoke in a hoarse, shaky voice.
Silver,
He replied,
you have a good reputation, and money too, which lots of sailors don't. So why are you going along with those swabs? I'd sooner die than turn against my captain.
an honest man.
I thought. Then, suddenly, from far out in the marsh, a cry of anger rang out. Could that be another man who didn't want to join the pirates? The cry, however, was followed by a long, horrible scream and the boom of a gunshot. The sound echoed against the rocks of Spyglass Hill. The whole marsh of birds rose again, darkening the sky. Then, the air became silent, except for the rustle of the birds. Tim jumped at the sound, but Long John didn't even blink. He stood where he was, resting lightly on his crutch, looking like a snake about to strike.
John,
Tim said, stretching out his hand.
please don't do this.
Don't touch me.
Roared Long John, leaping back with the speed of a trained gymnast.
All right, I won't touch you.
Tim said.
But just tell me, what was all that screaming?
That?
Said Long John, smiling but warier than ever, his eyes like glass.
Oh, I reckon that was Alan Jenkins.
Alan!
Cried Tim.
Rest his soul, he was a true seaman. As for you, Long John Silver, you're no mate of mine. If I die like a dog, I'll die doing the right thing. You've killed Alan, have you? Kill me too, if you can, but I won't join you.
Then, the brave fellow turned his back and started walking toward the beach, but he did not go far. With a cry, Long John seized a broken tree branch to steady himself, and then hurled his crutch like a missile at poor Tim Cooper's back. It struck him, point first, with stunning violence right between the shoulders. Tim's hands flew up, and he gave a sort of gasp and fell. Long John, agile as a monkey even without a leg or crutch, was on him in a moment and stabbed Tim hard in the back twice with his knife. I could hear Long John panting as he struck the blows, and I must have fainted, because the whole world swam away from me in a whirling mist. Long John, the birds, and the tall spyglass hilltops spun around and around. When I recovered, the monster had his crutch under his arm and his hat on his head. The murderer wiped his blood-stained knife on a tall wisp of grass beside Tim's motionless body. I couldn't believe I'd just witnessed a human life cruelly cut short. Then Long John blew a whistle, and several blasts rang far across the heated air. I was afraid, knowing more men would come at his signal.
I've got to get out of here.
I thought.
2 honest men are dead. I might be next.
Immediately, I crawled back to the thicket with all the speed and silence I could manage, while Long John and his men shouted to one another. As soon as I got to the trees, I ran as I'd never run before. I didn't care which way I went, so long as it was away from... Nearby, down the side of the hill, some gravel fell and rattled through the trees. My eyes turned instinctively in that direction, and I saw a dark figure quickly leap behind the trunk of a large tree. I couldn't tell if it was a bear or a monkey, but it seemed large and shaggy.
Wait, I have a pistol.
I thought.
I'm not defenseless.
So I walked toward the island man, and as soon as I moved in his direction, he stepped toward me. He hesitated, but at last, to my wonder and confusion, he threw himself on his knees and held out his clasped hands.
Who are you?
I asked. I'm poor Ben Gunn, he said in a voice that was hoarse like a rusty lock. I haven't spoken with a soul for 3 years. His skin was all sunburned, his lips were black, and his fair eyes looked bright in his dark face. His clothing was a tattered ship's canvas and ragged old cloth fastened together with small sticks and loops of animal hide.
Were you shipwrecked?
I cried. No, mate, he said. Marooned. I knew what that meant. Being marooned was a horrible punishment in which a pirate was left behind on a desolate island with only a little gunpowder and 1 bullet. Marooned 3 years ago, Gunn went on. I've lived on goats, berries, and oysters, but my heart craves a civilized diet. You don't happen to have a piece of cheese? No? Well, many long nights I've dreamed of cheese, toasted mostly.
If I ever get aboard again,
I said,
you shall have plenty of cheese.
As we talked, he was feeling my jacket, smoothing my hands, and generally showing a childish pleasure in the presence of a fellow creature.
I'm Jim,
I said. Jim, Jim, he repeated, quite pleased. Well now, Jim, can you believe I once had a devoted mother who looked after me?
Not really,
I answered. I was a polite, church-going boy, too, Gunn said. I've thought about it here on this lonely island, and I've decided to go back to church someday. I'll be good again, I know how. And Jim, looking all around him and lowering his voice to a whisper, I'm rich. This poor fellow was crazy, I thought. I must have looked unconvinced, for he repeated, Rich, rich, and I'll make you rich too, Jim. You'll be thankful you found me first. Suddenly, a shadow came over his face, and Gunn grabbed my arm and raised a forefinger threateningly at me. Tell the truth. Is that Flint's ship? He asked. Right then, I knew I'd found an ally.
It's not Flint's ship. Flint is dead. But some of Flint's men are aboard, which is bad luck for the rest of us.
Is there a man with 1 leg? He gasped.
He's the cook and the ringleader.
Gunn was still holding me by the wrist, and he squeezed hard. If you were sent by Long John Silver, he whispered, I'm as good as dead. I told him the whole story of our voyage and predicament, and when I was done, he patted me on the head. You're a good lad, Jim, said Gunn. You're all in a bad situation. Well, put your trust in me. Will your squire share Flint's treasure and give me passage home?
Yes,
I cried.
we all plan to share, and besides, without the pirates, we'll need you to help sail the vessel home.
Ah, said he, so you would. And he seemed relieved. I was on Flint's ship, he continued, when he and 6 men buried the treasure. The rest of us waited on the old walrus until Flint returned, alone. It must have been quite a battle, 6 against 1. Billy Bones was the first mate, and Long John was quartermaster. The men on board asked Flint where the treasure was, and he said, Go ashore if you like and stay there, but as for the ship, she'll hunt for more, by thunder. That's what he said.
How were you marooned?
I asked. Well, a few years later, I was on another ship, and we sighted this island. Boys, I said, Flint's treasure is here. Let's find it. For 12 days, we looked, but didn't find the treasure. And with each passing day, they got angrier at me. One morning, they just said, Here's a musket, spade, and pickaxe. Find Flint's money yourself. and the ship set sail without me. So, Kim, I've been here 3 years, and I haven't had a bite of decent food since.
We need to get back on board the Hispaniola,
I said.
but how?
I have a small boat I made, answered Gunn. I keep her under the White Rock. We can try to get to the ship after dark. Suddenly, the island echoed with cannon thunder, and Gunn and I ran toward the anchorage. We heard gunshots ring out next, and then, not a quarter of a mile away, was a startling sight. Fluttering above the woods was our country's flag, the Union Jack.